Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to the first edition of Cardinal Dash in 2021. I'm King Jemison, alongside, as always, my guy, Daniel Martinez Crams, and he's back at Stanford for the first time, so now we really feel like students again. But though we may be in the off season now, at least for football, we still have a lot to discuss today. There's been a lot of action in the Stanford football and Stanford basketball world, so let's get right into it. Daniel, we've seen 7 Stanford players, including Davis Mills and Simi Fehoko, the pair that, as you said in our tweet, won Stanford the Rose Bowl a few weeks ago. We've seen 7 players declare for the NFL draft. And since this year didn't count towards a player's eligibility, presumably every Stanford player could have returned. But the decision to enter the draft, it kind of made sense for all of these guys to different degrees. Still, on the Stanford side of things, can the Cardinals survive all these early entrants to the NFL draft in the 2021 season?
I'm not sure if Stanford was preparing for it, but it seems like there's someone at every position to step up. Are they going to play to the same level? Of course not. A lot of these people that did declare seem to have NFL futures. I think when we were reviewing it last week, we didn't expect a lot of them to go on to the NFL draft just because it felt like there was a little bit more to add at the college level for just about everyone. But they all are happy with their tape and they're happy to make their decision. So now you look to who's next. And next man up at the quarterback position, probably going to be Tanner McKee. He'll duke it out with Jack West, but we presume it's going to be Tanner McKee just because he has more upside, younger. So what does that start looking like? You saw a little bit of it in the Oregon game, in the first game of the year. Just an incredible arm talent. And then now is he able to learn the offense with a whole year to prepare? Now you start looking, hey, we're not losing that much at the quarterback position. Both of them highly rated coming out of high school. Can Tanner McKee step in? And barring injuries, we expect him to be a very, very good quarterback. Similarly, this wide receiver room should still be stacked. Of course, there could be some exits if Michael Wilson or Connor Weddington surprise us. I know that Connor Weddington says he's graduating early, so very clearly could go on to the NFL. But still, you have guys like Elijah Higgins staying back, John Humphreys, Bryson Tremaine, and that's a crew you can build around. It'll be younger. It won't be nearly as flashy, but still a very, very strong group just on the offensive side. And then the two more, the linemen, Foster Sarell, Drew Dahlman, excited for them to go on to the NFL. Stanford has some options at center, both Drake Nugent, Drake Metcalf. Haven't heard much of them, haven't seen much of them, which really is more a testament to how good Drew Dahlman was, that he anchored that position so well. But we've heard good things about them in practices from coaches, so we expect one of them will be able to win that battle. And then Foster Sarell, looks like there's a very, very clear backup there. Miles Hinton, the Georgia kid, coming right in and filling in. He was pretty fantastic this year.
Yeah, Daniel, I agree with all of that. And to go back to your first point, when you're saying that Stanford seemed prepared for it, I think it's because they were prepared for it. This is a weird situation for the Cardinal, in that some of these guys came back when you might not have expected them to last year. I mean, I think Foster Sarell, given his talent in high school, nobody would have expected that he would have been on campus for his senior season. You know, he's the kind of talent that doesn't stay more than 3 years. Davis Mills, had he not been hurt, he probably would have been gone after 3 years as well. And at the very least, you'd expect to get, just 4 years out of him. And then, of course, Curtis Robinson, Malik Antoine, those guys are both fifth years this year. You would never expect them to be back except for the NCAA eligibility rules. I think the only guys that you might be surprised about, Scooter Harrington, who I think, played his way into that position this year. And, obviously he's probably heard from other people in the NFL world that, he could either be drafted or make a roster. And I believe he was a fifth year as well. So, kind of at that stage of life. It was more of a stage of life decision. And Drew Dahlman is a guy who might not have been expected to be there, but he played his way into that. He was top graded center in the Pac-12. And I saw that of all the players that Stanford has just seen declare early for the draft, he is the only one in the top 10 of Mel Kiper's position rankings at his respective position. And he's the number 3 center. Now, I fully expect that Simi Fehoko and Davis Mills will each end up being in the top 10 of their position. I'm not sure people are counting on them going out, and I don't think people have reviewed their film thoroughly. When that comes out, people are going to realize that both of those guys are top 3 rounds. They're first day talents. And at the very least, first day, maybe second day. At very least the first 3 rounds for both of those guys. But Stanford is prepared for all those departures, has been prepared for a while. On the offensive line, I think where it hurts is depth, but you named it. There's plenty of bodies to step in right now. And we expect that the center position might not be elite like last year, whether it is Drake Metcalf or anybody else. Let's see. The other person I wrote down was well, let's see. What was the other name you threw out there? Drake Nugent.
Drake Nugent and Drake Metcalf. Yeah.
Yeah, so the two Drakes. That's why I was getting confused. Drake Nugent, Drake Metcalf. Drake Nugent played a little bit last year. I believe he appeared in 2 games with all the depth problems that Stanford was having. And so, I mean, we talked about it. We've talked about it all season. The experience that the class of 2019 got on the offensive line with all the injuries in that year has just paid dividends in the fact that Stanford's offensive line this year was way more experienced than a group should be when they got 3 true sophomores starting at various times. And I think those true sophomores are now about to be true juniors, and they've got a whole lot of playing experience under their belt. And so I think Stanford's going to have a very good offensive line. I think to me, the biggest question is, can you find a number 1 receiver without Simi Fehoko, and particularly if Connor Weddington goes too? And is Tanner McKee going to be all that he's billed to be? He certainly showed the arm strength against Oregon, but he also showed some inaccuracy, and like a guy who had not played for a couple years coming into that position. I fully expect that he is going to be a very good quarterback in his Stanford tenure. The question is he ready next year? And that will be the difference between whether Stanford is a winning team next year or a Pac-12 contender.
And I think that's fair to put that much on Tanner McKee. And I think Stanford would feel confident in saying, hey, this is our quarterback. This is our guy. We need him to develop, because there's been a lot of good things we've seen. There were those issues. So getting him that target, I think you could make a case that Micah Wilson at times was Stanford's best receiver. Of course, he's not nearly as flashy as Fehoko, but just in terms of ability to catch the ball, route running, he's up there. And I think him starring could be a great sign for Stanford. He started in that Cal game especially and had a great game in big game. And then I think there's less prepared Stanford just in general is on defense. And we'll get into this later when we talk about Stanford's outlook. But I don't know if Stanford is necessarily ready for Malik Antoine to move on. Of course, you never expect a guy to come back for his 6th season, but who's there at the safety position that's really ready to step in? It's a position that Stanford has really struggled at. The names you're going to throw out are Kendall Williamson, Jonathan McGill, if he can go from nickel back to safety, Alakai Gilman, who was a freshman this year, Noah Williams, a senior. One of those players are going to have to step up. It's probably going to be Williamson or McGill, but so far haven't seen enough from either of them to feel confident about your free safety position. And then inside linebacker, where Curtis Robinson was, it looked a little bit different at the end of the year because Ricky Maison was out. Jacob Mangum-Farrar was out. We didn't even see Tristan Sinclair, who played quite a few games his freshman year. So one of those are going to have to step up into that giant hole that Curtis Robinson is leaving. All of these exits, all of these NFL draft entrances are going to hurt Stanford, even if it's the best thing for these players to do.
That's the way it goes. I mean, when everybody has the opportunity to come back, David Shaw and his staff were just daydreaming about what it would be like to have another year of Davis Mills, what it would be like to have a 6th year in Curtis Robinson at inside linebacker and a 6th year in Malik Antoine at free safety. I mean, 2 of the most heady positions on defense. But I think linebacker I'm less worried about. You just threw out a lot of names that have a ton of talent. Ricky Maison, we've been excited about for a long time. Hopefully next year is the year that he gets on the field and can stay on the field. I just saw Levani Damuni was one of the top 5 highest graded linebackers in the conference. The guy is a hitter. I mean, he just plays physical football. I loved the play that he had against UCLA where he just ran right through the blocker, used the blocker as the tackler. I mean, he was like a bowling ball, quite literally. We use that phrase too much, but that's what bowling should look like. You hit the pin and the pin knocks down the other pin. And that's what I think a few Stanford offensive players tweeted, that's who we're blocking every day. And if we can do that, then we can take on anybody. So he's a guy who has a lot of talent. Linebacker was only an issue this year because of injuries early on. And, you can never count on health, but hopefully it's not lightning doesn't seem to strike twice in the same spot unless it's Hoover Tower. And if that's the case, then I think Stanford should be fine at linebacker. It is the secondary and the defensive line that are going to be bigger issues. like you said, we'll get into that in a bit with Stanford's future outlook. But there's just not a lot there behind Antoine. And, he wasn't a fantastic player, but he was a very reliable player and has been starting for at least 3 years now. So, that's just a lot of experience to replace. And then you're right on about Michael Wilson. It's almost easy to forget about him because he missed the last 3 games of the season. But he was fantastic in his action early on in this season and in 2019 as well. He kind of carried the wide receiver room at times. He's not the big play threat that Fehoko is, but he is a great possession wide receiver, great route runner, and I think somebody who Tanner McKee can develop chemistry with, kind of be a safety blanket. That he's going to be open on the slant or the hitch and get you that 5 yards when you need it. The question is Stanford going to have that big play threat? We saw them try a lot with both Bryson Tremaine and John Humphreys. And I think between those two guys, you're going to have a jump ball target that Tanner McKee can rely on for those 3rd and longs.
One of those two, and we saw it. Both of them made spectacular catches, highlight reel catches, circus catches at times that kept Stanford in games. Of course, Simi Fehoko was the one doing a lot of it, but both of those other players are huge targets. And I make this saying every single time, Bryson Tremaine only makes big plays. Almost everything seems to go for a touchdown, 3rd down conversion, something. He just keeps making plays. Well, it looks like we lost King, but our next topic was going to be talking about where Stanford is in the college football pecking order, which is really relevant as we step up into this into the college football championship coming up. Where does Stanford fit in? No Pac-12 has really been in this tournament sort of thing since 2016. So what does it take to get a Pac-12 team back in there, and could it even be Stanford? Right now, I'm not convinced. Right now, I see Stanford topping out in reaching the top 25 teams. It doesn't seem like Stanford is recruiting at the level to be a top 25 team consistently, especially not a top 4 team to make the college football playoff. Right now, that just seems too high for where Stanford is at.
I think you're exactly right. Back. Yeah, I'm back. I don't know what happened. Technology will fail you, but it's all about recovery. My dad always likes to tell me golf is a game of recovery, and I kind of think life is too. But it's recruiting that you brought up, and I think it's recruiting that is the central tenet of this question. You always see around this time of year a guy named Bud Elliott from 24/7 Sports talking about the blue chip ratio, and he has this list of teams where over 50% of their signees, not their non-scholarship players, but over 50% of their scholarship players are 4 or 5 star recruits. And that is just not the case for Stanford. And that is something that Bud Elliott has found is basically a requirement to win a national championship. If you look at this year's blue chip ratio, the teams are Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, LSU, Oklahoma, Clemson, Florida, Michigan, Auburn, Penn State, Notre Dame, Washington, USC, and Texas A&M. Those schools are at a different level in many ways than the Cardinal. And obviously part of that's that they have different challenges or lesser challenges in terms of recruiting and academics. But the point remains that if Stanford gets on the field, one of those top teams, they're going to have to play a near perfect game to be able to make up for the talent deficiencies. I think that would be far more apparent on defense and offense this year. I think if you'd thrown out Stanford against Alabama this year, I would have expected that Stanford would score 20 plus points. I just would have expected Alabama to score 50 plus points. I just don't know how the Cardinal could ever stop a team with that kind of speed and elusiveness in the open field when you just see Stanford missing tackles against everybody. But this is not just a Stanford problem. This is a Pac-12 problem. There are only 2 Pac-12 teams in that list. Oregon will likely join them, but that'll leave Washington, USC, and Oregon as the only teams in the Pac-12 with elite level talent. That doesn't translate to elite level success, but at least in terms of the recruiting numbers. But no Pac-12 team has been in the college football playoff since 2016. The national championship game that's happening on Monday, that has been a non-Pac-12 affair since 2015 when Oregon made it and lost to Ohio State. So the whole conference is just a step behind. And we know that the recruiting is not as big a challenge for some of these schools as others. USC is in maybe the best place to recruit in the country. But outside of Southern California, the Pac 12 footprint does not have as many elite players, and that's a challenge. And as we've talked about a lot across the Pac 12 media landscape, they're not getting the same kind of attention as the other conferences, at least by the national media. And that just means, if you're not on the TV, recruits around the country just aren't going to know about you. But I think the playoff conversation is less interesting for me, Daniel. Do you think Stanford can be a Pac-12 contender next year?
I think Stanford will contend next year. It depends a lot on the development, as we were just speaking to. But to me, it seems that Stanford can't be a team that relies on its offense to win games. And it looks like that's where they're at right now. When we talk about developing talent, I think just the nature of Stanford is going to have to be a defensive first team. And the way they're set up now, where it looks like it's Tanner McKee airing it out, ideally Austin Jones, Nathaniel Pete make some noise again next year. But it just doesn't seem like Stanford is going to have an elite defense. And I think that's what it's going to take to win the Pac-12. Will they compete? Will they win games? Absolutely. I think you saw this year that there's clearly some teams that Stanford is better than, and even with the losses they had. But are they good enough to compete in the North with what we expect to be a much better Oregon team next year, a Washington team in its second year with head coach Jimmy Lake? Now you're starting to worry, right? Because the window for Stanford to compete for a Pac-12 championship was this year. This was their best year because of all of the seniority they had. Davis Mills, Drew Dahlman, Foster Sarl, that crew, that great 2017 recruiting class was the reason that they were excited for this year. And I don't know if it can carry over into 2021.
That's a great point. The 2017 class has been a huge part of Stanford's success for years now. And then when we saw Davis Mills finally turn into Davis Mills that we always hoped he would be, I mean, it got my mouth watering thinking about what Stanford could do next year or what they could have done in a 12-game season this year. I think that they probably would have won the North. That may be a hot take. I think they would have started slow as they did, but I think ultimately they would have won nine games and likely won the North, particularly since we saw them beat Washington in Seattle. And so it's a shame we didn't get to see that. And I share your pessimism about a drop off next year. And yet I still think Stanford is going to be in it because I don't think that neither Oregon or Washington has proved that they're a consistent, dominant team in the North. We've seen Oregon recruit to a level to where they're going to lap the field pretty soon unless the other Pac-12 schools can keep up. But Jimmy Lake doesn't seem to have solved the offense problem that Washington has had for a while. And Oregon is still trying to develop a quarterback to fill in behind Justin Herbert. I do think that the offense of Joe Moorhead is just going to make it easier on whoever that quarterback is. But I mean, both those schools seem to be making life too tough for themselves offensively. Like it just seems like with all the talent they have, they should be able to score more easily. But on Stanford's side, I think you're exactly right. They want to play complementary football. They want to play slow. They want to run the ball. They're not trying to be a high tempo spread offense. They're an efficient offense. They're going to put the ball in the end zone on most of their drives if they're executing properly. But they're going to do that over very long 10-play drives, 5-minute drives, not the kind of thing that the Alabama and Ohio State are doing. And so if you're going to do that, you're relying on your defense to get some stops. And in fact, you're relying on your defense to get stops on the majority of drives. Whereas maybe a spread team can say, you create 2 turnovers a game, maybe force 1 punt. We think we got a chance to win. Stanford can't really play like that. Yes, they're going to limit the possessions, but that only increases the importance of each of those possessions. And so in order to do that and to win at an elite level playing Stanford style of football, you have to have at least a very good defense. And I don't see the bones of that yet. Linebacker, not worried about. Just talked about that. I think that there's good talent at cornerback. Safety, somebody's going to have to fill in for Malik Antoine, but I think it can be done. It's the defensive line that really is again a question to me. Now, if Dalen Wade-Perry, Thomas Booker, and Tomas Schaffer all return, then I think you're looking at a pretty good defensive line. I think Stanford's defense will be better next year than it was this year. And if that's the case, Stanford should be about the same as this year. The question is, did they miss their window? because I do think both Oregon and Washington will be better next year as well. And I think that they may have just, gotten just a nose up on Stanford enough that the Cardinal will not be able to win the North.
Yeah, I think that analysis is exactly right. The recruiting has just slipped a little bit for Stanford, and the defense just isn't there. 10th in yards per play allowed on defense, tied for worst in yards per passing attempt, 10th worst in rushing yards allowed, 105th in the nation out of 127 teams in points per drive. Now you're looking at stats where like this defense can't sustain Stanford, and it seems so often, hey, you know what? Oregon, Washington may not have the best offenses, but all too often Stanford's defense makes bad offenses look much better than they are. And that's what we've seen through the years where Stanford just can't keep up. Even if they have that great offense, trying to outscore teams when your defense is just porous, it's not going to work out.
Well, and that's the thing about the recruiting rankings. Last point we'll make on this question. You look at these recruiting rankings, and some of them have been fine. I mean, Stanford was number 21 in the country in 2019, and they're third in the Pac-12 in 2019, currently third in the Pac-12 for 2021. 2020 was a drop-off, but we talked about it with RJ Abatia. There was a lot at play there. It's a small class. It's 53rd nationally, 8th in the Pac-12. But their classes before that had been just fine and among the top in the Pac-12. The problem is it's offensive players carrying those classes. It's guys like Austin Jones, like Miles Hinton, who are top 100 talents offensively, but you're not getting a whole lot of top 100 players defensively. Thomas Booker, one of the lone top 100 or even top 200 defensive recruits I can remember in the past few classes. Aaron Armitage, Stanford's only 4-star in the upcoming class. He's a defensive end, and he could have an opportunity to play next year, depending on what training camp looks like, because there's obviously a need there, the defensive line. So I think, to me, Daniel, I'll give you a chance to disagree. I see Stanford right now, knowing very little about the current roster, probably like an 8-4 team, as they were in 2018 with KJ Costello, when once again they had a good offense but a very struggling defense.
That sounds just about right to me, King. I'm good with that 8-4 number.
And that probably won't be competing for a Pac-12 title, but we do have some Stanford programs that are competing not just for Pac-12 titles, but for national championships. Most notably, women's basketball, the number 1 ranked team in the country, led by the GOAT, Tara Vanderveer. She's got the most wins in the history of the sport, but she is not done. She is not satisfied. She wants that national championship. And boy, do they look ready to do that. They just beat number 6 Arizona on the road by 27, an 81-54 final score. That means they've already picked up 2 double-digit top 10 wins when you add that Arizona game to the UCLA win just a few days prior. And now they're going to go face number 11 Oregon on the road this Friday. Bit of revenge for the way that Stanford's senior night went last year. But of course, Oregon is very different this year. But meanwhile, men's basketball, they're not number 1 in the country. They're not ranked, but they are chugging along successfully so far, 2-1 in the Pac-12, with wins over Arizona and Oregon State and a disastrous second half and a very ugly loss to Oregon. But now they're coming home to Santa Cruz to play Washington and Washington State. For once, the Cougars are actually the better team in the Apple State. And the Cardinal are number 52 in the net, and they're currently sitting somewhere between a 7 and a 12 seed, according to all bracketologists. So, Daniel, I want to talk about the good news first. Why is women's basketball so damn good?
You look around, and there's so many reasons for women's basketball to be number 1, and I think that's why they've had so much success this year. They have 12 players that they've gone to consistently, and everyone has looked good in their minutes. And it starts obviously at the top where you have Kiana Williams, a senior, who's absolutely carrying this team. You have 5th-year Anna Wilson, who's looking better and better. Now she's hitting threes, just adding stuff to her game, really, really elevating it. And the other day had 9 rebounds out of the guard spot. And then you have someone like Haley Jones, who's just a transcendent player, has looked fantastic, just so much fun to watch. Great article on ESPN about her. She's playing every position 1 through 4. She's doing so much for the Stanford team in stride. She can run every single play out of every position. It's really fantastic to watch. And then you have someone like Fran Belibi, who's not only dunking, but just showing up game after game. Last game against Arizona State, put the team on her back, scored 23. All of those different options, and now Tara Vanderveer is going to her bench for a Cameron Brink, who was, up until she got hurt, the second leading scorer on the team. All of these different options is why Stanford is doing so well and looking like a number one team, because very often there's a difference between 1 and 5 in women's basketball. And right now you can see that when Stanford plays a number 6 Arizona on the road and has their largest road margin of victory against a top 6 team in program history. Those are the kinds of numbers that Stanford is putting up right now and why they're really excited about the rest of the season.
Tara Vanderveer just has an embarrassment of riches this year, and she deserves it more than anybody in sports, not just women's basketball. I didn't realize, I knew Haley Jones was a scorer, and I knew she was a dynamic passer. I didn't realize how good of a rebounder she is, nearly averaging a double-double, 14.9 points, 9.8 rebounds. That'll be something to watch for. Maybe she can get that rebound number up by the end of the season. And then Fran Beliebe is just, I mean, she may be the most well-known player in women's college basketball right now, even if she's not the best player on her own team, because of what she can do athletically. And I think she's shown a complete game this year. And it's the depth that really separates Stanford from the rest of the field. You got 5 players averaging double figures. You probably have 8 to 10 players that would start at any school. And that's why I think Stanford, for the first time in a few years, is not just a contender to win the conference, but a contender to win the national championship, and would have to be the favorite at this point in the season. And they're going to get challenged in the Pac-12. The Pac-12 in men's basketball, struggling a bit. In women's basketball, it's as strong as ever. You have multiple teams who are ranked. Obviously, Stanford's already beaten, I believe, the 2 Pac-12 teams below it in the rankings, in Arizona and UCLA, but there's also Oregon and a couple others on the fringes of the national conversation. Then just turning our attention to men's basketball at the end of the show, that win over Oregon State was huge that they picked up yesterday because they were without their starting backcourt for most of the game. Dejon Davis was out before the game. Bryce Wills gets hurt during the game. That could have been a disastrous spot for Stanford. Oregon State's not bad, but it would certainly go down as a quad 2 loss, maybe even quad 3, depending on where the Beavers sink to. So that was one you had to avoid, and they were able to do that. And I think that you saw some really promising things from freshman Nicole O'Connell. And then, of course, it's all about Oscar Da Silva. I don't think we realized with Zaire Williams on the team just how big the gap was going to be between Da Silva and the rest of this squad. But he's playing like an All-American, averaging nearly 20 points a game, about 7 rebounds a game. I think he's got a shot at Pac-12 Player of the Year if people are paying attention to Stanford basketball. And I think that this is a really big week for them to have the 2 Washington schools at home in the Santa Cruz arena that Stanford's become more familiar with. Washington's a bad team this year. That is an absolute must-win. That would go down as a Q3 or Q4 loss in the eyes of the committee. And then Washington State is better. I think they only have 1 loss so far in the season, about 8-1. But that's a dangerous spot for the Cardinal, not a game that they can really afford to lose at home. They're probably going to be somewhere around the bubble. Hopefully they can play well enough that they're safely on the right side of the bubble. But I think Stanford needs to show something with, number 1, their ability to avoid turnovers, and number 2, their ability to shoot the 3. They're under 30% on the season, and that was a strength for Stanford last season.
Just Da Silva's play has been mesmerizing to me this year. That he has established himself with Zaire on the team as the best wing on Stanford, I think is really, really impressive that he's been able to do that. And clearly, or there should be a future for him in professional basketball if he does not decide to, become a doctor tomorrow. Whatever he does is going to be absolutely fantastic. But just how Stanford men's basketball is coming together is exciting to me, right? They have that great defense, but even without Bryce and Dejon, still able to win games. And now they're going to Santa Cruz. They're getting some home games. Both the women's team and the men's team are going to be there. It's going to be like a reunion. It's going to be crazy playing games in California. But there's something to build on. There's something to look forward to. And then now there was a chance for this team to be a tournament team. That's something to play for. And they were so upset that they missed it last year.
Yeah, and I think that they would have maybe been in last year. We talked about that a lot, that it could have been a huge turning point for Jared Haas. Frankly, it's probably a must-win season for Jared Haas. He probably needs to make the NCAA tournament but I think he will because he's recruited and built this program up to an entirely different level. I think he's one of the hardest working recruiters in college basketball, and we've seen that pay off with 2 consecutive 5-star signees. And I think that Zaire Williams hasn't even really began to scratch the surface, to use a sports cliche. Once he starts to play like the player we know that he can be, Stanford is going to be elite offensively as well as defensively. But we wish the best for Dejon Davis and Bryce Wills. Both those guys need to get back and get healthy for Stanford to realize that potential. But Daniel, that is all for us this week on Cardinal Dash. And check out Stanford Hoops, both sides later this weekend, all in Santa Cruz. Wish we could be there with them, but I think they're going to have a raucous virtual crowd atmosphere. And good luck to the many Stanford teams who have moved in or about to move in to start their seasons this winter. Just saw women's volleyball was ranked number 3 in the country in the preseason poll. So excited to see them take the court soon. But please go out and follow at Dash Sports TV on all the social medias. Got the best Pac-12 coverage around. And I know Daniel and I, we're going to be focusing not just on football, not just on basketball, but on the entire Stanford sports universe. And we're really excited to do that and think it'll be something to pay attention to in these long winter months. And go ahead and check out our website as well at dashsports.tv. Also, we have a great partnership with the folks at Sports Pac-12, including our guy Daniel's columns. So go out and follow them as well. And we hope everyone has a happy new year, and we'll see you here next week. Stay safe and go Card.